Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for watching. In this video, I'm going to show you a super easy way to get some really pretty soft watercolor flowers. This is a simple project perfect for beginners, so let's dive right in. To begin this technique, I'm taking a large round brush. I've coated that with water and I'm just going to dry off the very tip of the brush so that the base of the brush is still wet, or the belly of the brush, but the tip is a little bit more dry, just allowing us to pick up a little bit more of that pigment. So I just want to put pigment on the very tip of my brush, and using this sort of back and forth motion with my hand, I'm going to create 4 petals. So I just start by pressing down on the tip of the brush to get that pigment onto the paper, and then I'm using this sort of side to side, up and down method to just push that pigment in towards the center of the flower. You may need to rotate your paper. I'm just showing you here rotating my hand, which can be a little bit difficult sometimes depending on the positioning of your petals, but rotating your paper can always help. So I'm just going to show you another flower here. So I've got the pigment on the very tip of my brush and the belly of my brush is going to stay wet. So I'm just applying that pigment right into the center and then rotating my brush while making these sort of up and down motions with my hand. You're basically going to create 4 little triangle shapes that make up the petals of the flower. And I'll do another one right here. You can try this as well, of course, with different colors. And if you don't get enough pigment right away, you can always go back in with a little dot of paint near the center portion, just to darken the center area a little bit more. All of the supplies that I used will be listed below, with the exception of the brush that I'm using, because this brush is actually a part of a project that I have been working on since last year. I actually created my very own Wonder Forest watercolor brushes, so this is giving you a sneak peek into one of the larger sizes, and I will definitely be announcing more later. The color that I'm using is burnt sienna. It's a nice kind of burnt orange shade, and I really like when you use a lot of water with it. It kind of gives this peachy tone. It's really pretty. So I'm just going to do one more flower right here. This is my warm-up piece. This is on sort of a more lower grade paper. So I'm going to then take this idea and this method and transfer it over to a nicer paper and finish off the flowers. All right, so now that I've got that method down, by the way, I highly suggest you practice this on some lower grade paper first, just to get the hang of the hand movements, because it can be a little tricky when you're trying to turn your hand all these different ways. Like I said, turning the paper definitely helps. So now I've just moved on to a higher quality paper, and I'm just doing the exact same thing. I'm gonna make a little composition out of this one. So to recap, I've wet my brush entirely, I've dried off just the tip, and then I've dipped just the tip into the watercolor pigment. I need to stop saying just the tip because it's kind of weirding me out. And then I take that to the paper and create these triangle shapes using those hand movements and little sort of up and down motions. Because again, the idea is to just kind of push that pigment into the center while keeping the top part of the petal a little bit more dry. So using the brush that way, as you're moving your hand, you're gonna kind of sop up some of that excess water, which allows for the top of the petal to have a little bit more of a transparency and less of like a globby blob of water. All right, so with those dry, I'm just taking lamp black and I'm using the very tip of my brush, and I'm just adding a little bit of center detail here using thin lines and a couple little dots to the top of those lines. And I'm just going to do that on all of the flowers to bring them together. I actually really liked how this looked before I went a little bit further with it. Again, this might be a case of going too far. I'm not sure. You guys can let me know what you think when the composition is complete. I thought it would be nice to throw in a couple eucalyptus pieces here, and then I went ahead and added in some leaves. For the eucalyptus, I'm using a little bit of olive green mixed with blue and Chinese white, and I've just created the kind of blue-green shade. I guess now would also be a good time to let you guys know that I do have a full 20+ minute video all about color mixing on my Patreon page. So I will link that above and in my description below so you can check it out. If you join my Patreon page, you'll also get access to a bunch of other exclusive videos and downloadable content and stuff that I don't release anywhere else. And every single month I add new stuff to it. But yes, that color mixing video is pretty essential, especially for beginners in learning watercolor and mixing colors, and even just expanding your own watercolor color collection. So now I'm just throwing in a couple of leaves, and I'm using more of a yellow-based green. I didn't really have an idea in mind when I started this piece. As I said, I kind of liked the flowers just as they were, but let me know what you guys think, if you like it with the eucalyptus and leaves or without. I probably could have done some other kind of flowers in there as well. So this is kind of a bonus that I wanted to share with you. I wanted to see how this method would work on the brand new Stonehenge Aqua Black watercolor paper. I actually demonstrated this paper in a previous video before this paper was even released, but it is now officially released. It's a really cool 100% watercolor paper, and I wanted to see how it looked with the gold watercolor by Core watercolors that I have. It's my favorite gold, and it looks super amazing on this black paper. So using the exact same method again, I'm just creating some flowers. This time I'm turning my paper, which makes it a lot easier, as I said previously, and I'm just gonna create like a little composition on here using this black paper. So I've sketched in just a couple random pieces of florals and greenery and stuff that I thought would be good. Basically just a guideline so that I knew what I was trying to do this time. So I'm just using regular watercolor colors now. I'm using Naples yellow, and I'm creating these kind of daisy looking little flowers. I'm also using some turquoise mixed with a little bit of white to create these little eucalyptus areas, as well as some little berries. And all of this is just regular watercolor that's going on this paper. You do have to make sure when you use black watercolor paper that your pigment is nice and strong. So you don't want to use as much water as you normally would on watercolor paper. I also kind of stopped following my sketch that I made, which I'll erase later. I just did that in a white pencil crayon, and I started doing my own thing. So I just wanted to see how this paint performed on the paper as a second test. I think in my last video I used gouache, so I just wanted to kind of see the difference between watercolor and gouache. I will link that previous video up here in the cards as well if you want to check it out. So here is the final composition. I'm happy with how the colors turned out. The gold flowers kind of look a little more subtle compared to the rest of the piece, but overall, I think I'm happy with how it looks. I hope that you guys liked this tutorial. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. It really helps me out, and subscribe if you haven't, and I hope to see you in the next one.